What's up, mobile devs? I hope everything is going well. Today I want to share with you the part 2 of the tutorial related to the BottomSheet. To be honest, at first I didn't plan to continue this tutorial, but so many of you requested me to add the backdrop on it. In the first tutorial, the backdrop seemed almost useless since the background behind the card was dark. But clearly, by changing the background color using white, the problem is quite obvious. Although it seems trivial, from my perspective there are some very useful concepts behind creating the backdrop. I take this opportunity to tell you that a few months ago I created a Patreon account where I actively share the source code of really special animations in React Native using Skia and Reanimated. I would like to sincerely thank my patrons who have supported me and motivated me to be more active on YouTube as well. If you want to stay updated, you can follow me on Twitter where I post previews of the Patreon animations. That said, we can finally go ahead and get our hands dirty. So basically here you can see that I've opened the project that was already available at the end of the previous tutorial of the part 1. I've simply updated the Expo SDK to the version 48 and I've updated even the React Native gesture handler package and the Reanimated package to the latest versions available. So fortunately, the code is basically the same, nothing has changed. The two packages, of course, have some updates, but nothing on the APIs. So right now, in order to understand better what is the current missing part, let's try to update here the background color. And let's update the background color of the button. So right now, you can see, of course, that there is something that isn't working anymore. So, or at least it is working, but it's quite different as what we are expecting. There is definitely here missing the backdrop view. So let's also update the status bar. So right here, just to keep things clean. But basically the problem is almost the same. So we are not able to see the backdrop view under the BottomSheet. So let's start to add here simply a React Native view. So let's import view from React Native and let's define here a simple view with style sheet absolute fill object and with this background color equal to 0.4. So this background color is almost black with an opacity of 0.4 and I've used stylesheet.absolutefill object in order to cover all the screen. So right now the backdrop is of course available, but the problem is that we are not able to toggle the button. So right now basically I'm tapping on the button, but the tap has been totally cached by the backdrop view. So in order to unhandle the tap events, the gestures, the interaction, basically we can simply use the pointer events property and we can set it to none. So let's reload. Here you can see that everything is working basically as before and the backdrop is available. So there are other few issues that we need to cover, of course. First of all, we don't want to see the backdrop when the card is not visible. So in this specific use case, we don't want to see, of course, the backdrop. In this case, we want to see it. And in order to manage this thing, of course, we need to animate the opacity of the view. And in order to animate, we always need to use the animated view. So animated, of course, is imported by React Native Reanimated. So here, let's define the reanimated backdrop style. And for now, let's simply use the use animated style and let's return basically nothing. Let's pass this backdrop style to the style. And let's try to understand what do we need to change right here. So of course, we are going to play with the opacity, but we need to understand how to set the opacity value. So here, the backdrop is of course available, but is totally invisible. So basically, fortunately from the previous tutorial, we still have the active shared value, and the active shared value tells us if the card is visible or not. So basically, if the card is visible, we want that the opacity of the backdrop is equal to 0. Otherwise, we want that the backdrop is equal to 1. So actually, it is the opposite. So if the card is visible, we want to see the backdrop with the opacity equal to 1. Otherwise, we want to set it equal to 0. So here you can see that the condition is correct. So of course, we want to have a smooth transition, and in order to have a smooth transition, we simply need to apply the with timing high order function from Reanimated. So you can see that right now everything is working perfectly. So there's still a simple issue that we need to solve that is not that trivial actually. So basically, by tapping on the button, we are able to have the nice behavior, but by tapping on the backdrop right now, nothing is happening. And the point is that we want to dismiss this card while tapping on the backdrop. So in order to handle this use case, we need to implement here the untouched start callback on the animated view, and we want basically to scroll to 0. So we want to dismiss the bottom sheet. So that's interesting enough that the untouched start callback is not firing, and that's quite obvious since we have forced pointer events equal to none. So by forcing it back to auto, as it was at the beginning, we can see that the untouched start is firing nicely. So how can we solve the problem? Basically, we cannot force pointer events to auto, otherwise the button will not be clickable at the beginning. And we cannot force pointer events equal to none, otherwise the untouched start will not be called and the bottom sheet will not be dismissed. So basically, we want to change this pointer events property dynamically, referring to the active.value. But the point is that the active.value is not simply a JavaScript value available with a useState hook, but it is actually a shared value from Reanimated. So basically, we cannot do something like that by something where we can use this type of condition. Of course, it will not work. So in order to manage this property, we have a similar hook in React Native, in Reanimated, similar to the use animated style, that is related to the props. And this hook is called use animated props. So let's define here the Reanimated backdrop props with use animated props. And here, let's return pointer events with the active.value. So basically, if the card is active, if the bottom sheet is visible, we want to be able to catch all the tap on the backdrop. So we want to set the auto behavior. Otherwise, we want to be able to interact with the components that are under the backdrop. So we want to set back the pointer events equal to none. So we can do that, and we simply need to pass these reanimated backdrop props to the animated props. So right now TypeScript will complain since the type is not perfect. So we are simply going to close our eyes and we are going to set the object equal to any of type any. So as you can see right now, everything is working totally smoothly. So of course, this transition was needed. The backdrop is super useful, and this approach, this pattern is it happens in a lot of different use cases in animations. So that was definitely a missing piece inside this tutorial. So hopefully the explanation was clear. Thanks a lot for staying with me all this time to check out this tutorial. If you like this type of animations, this kind of tutorial, feel free to subscribe to the channel. And if you have some suggestions for future videos, feel free to suggest me these videos, these animations in the section below.